Daniel had worked at the advertising agency for almost 3 years, and in all that time he'd managed to stay pretty much invisible. Not in a bad way, mind you. He was good at his job, met his deadlines, and got along with everyone. But when it came to office parties, team-building events, or those awkward lunch conversations where everyone shares their weekend plans, Daniel was the guy who smiled, nodded, and listened. He preferred it that way, honestly. While his co-workers talked about their hobbies, their talents, their exciting lives outside the office, Daniel kept his past tucked away like an old photograph you don't want to look at too often. It hurt less that way. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning, pinned to the break room bulletin board in bright yellow paper. Annual talent show fundraiser. Sign up now. The company did this every year, apparently. Daniel had missed the first two because he'd called in sick both times. Not actually sick, just not ready to sit through an evening of amateur entertainment while pretending to be enthusiastic. But this year, his desk neighbor Rita caught him reading the notice. Rita was one of those naturally friendly people who could talk to anyone about anything. She'd been trying to crack Daniel's shell since he started working there. "You should totally sign up," she said, balancing her coffee mug and a plate of donuts. "It's actually pretty fun. Last year, someone from IT did this amazing card trick, and the guy from the mailroom played guitar. He was actually really good." Daniel shrugged. "I'm not really the performing type." "Oh, come on, everyone has something they can do. What about you? What's your secret talent?" The break room had gotten crowded. Morning coffee rush. Several people were now half listening to their conversation while waiting for the coffee maker. "I don't really have one," Daniel said, hoping to end the conversation. Rita wasn't giving up that easily. "There's got to be something. Can you sing, dance, do impressions?" Someone from accounting chimed in. "Maybe he can juggle. You look like a juggler, Daniel." A few people laughed. It wasn't mean-spirited, just typical office banter. But Daniel felt that familiar tightness in his chest, that feeling of being put on the spot. "I play piano," he said quietly, almost automatically. The words came out before he could stop them. The room went quiet for just a second, then Rita laughed. "Yeah, right. And I'm a professional ballerina." "No, seriously," someone else joined in. "What do you really do, Daniel?" Daniel realized they thought he was joking, making a rare attempt at humor, the quiet guy finally playing along with the office culture. And you know what? That was fine. Better than fine, actually. Let them think it was a joke. "I'm serious," he said, keeping his face completely straight. "I'll perform at the talent show. Sign me up." This got real laughs now. Rita pulled out her phone where she'd been keeping the digital sign-up sheet. Okay, I'm adding you. Daniel, piano performance. This is great. You're finally participating in something." The rest of the morning, people kept stopping by his desk making little jokes. "Hey Mozart, don't forget to practice. Should we rent a tuxedo for you? Maybe you can play chopsticks, really wow everyone." Daniel played along, smiling at each comment. Inside, though, something strange was happening. That locked door in his mind, the one he'd sealed shut 10 years ago, was rattling slightly, not opening, just making its presence known. By lunch, the whole office seemed to know about Daniel's joke performance. The company had about 60 employees, and in a space that size, any bit of entertainment spread fast. People were bored, and the idea of the quiet guy from the analytics department claiming he'd play piano was the most interesting thing that had happened all week. "You know you don't actually have to do anything, right?" Rita said during lunch. They were sitting in the small courtyard outside the building, one of the few nice features of the old converted warehouse they worked in. "I mean, you can just not show up to the talent show, or you could go up there and play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or something. Everyone will think it's funny." Daniel unwrapped his sandwich slowly. "When is it again?" 4 weeks from Friday. They're renting out that event space downtown, the one with the actual stage. They go pretty big with this thing. Last year they raised like $10,000 for the children's hospital. 4 weeks. Daniel did the math in his head without meaning to. If he practiced every day. No. What was he thinking? He wasn't going to practice. This was just a joke. Let it be a joke. I'll figure something out, he told Rita. But that night, lying in bed, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about it. He hadn't thought about piano, really thought about it in so long. He'd trained himself not to. Every time a memory tried to surface, he'd push it down, distract himself, think about literally anything else. Now, though, the memories were coming whether he wanted them or not. His grandmother's apartment, the old upright piano against the wall, the way the afternoon light came through the window and made patterns on the keys. Her patient voice, always encouraging, never harsh. Again, Daniel. Feel the music. Don't just play the notes. He'd been so young when it started. 4 years old, maybe 5. His parents had dropped him off at his grandmother's place after school every day while they worked. She'd been a music teacher in another life, in another country, and when she'd seen him bang randomly on her piano keys, something had lit up in her eyes. "You have the hands for it," she'd said in her accented English. "Long fingers. Good for reaching." What started as something to keep a kid busy had turned into something else entirely. By the time Daniel was 7, he was practicing 2 hours a day. By 10, it was 4 hours. He didn't mind, though. He loved it. Loved the way the music made him feel. Loved making his grandmother proud. Loved the escape it provided from everything else. School had been hard for Daniel. He'd been shy, awkward, the kid other kids picked on for being quiet and different. But when he sat at the piano, none of that mattered. He was powerful there, in control, the best at something. Competitions came next. Small ones at first, local stuff, then regional, then national. The trophies stacked up in his grandmother's living room. By the time he was 16, music schools were sending him letters, scholarship offers. His grandmother had cried when the big envelope from Juilliard arrived. "I knew it," she'd said, holding his face in her weathered hands. "I always knew you were special." Daniel rolled over in bed, pushing the memories away. That was a different life, a different person, really. That kid who could make a piano sing, who had his whole future mapped out in music conservatories and concert halls, that kid was gone. He'd made sure of that. The next few days at work were more of the same. People kept bringing up the talent show, making jokes about his upcoming performance. Someone had even made a fake poster advertising Daniel Piano Virtuoso and taped it in the break room. He'd laughed along with everyone else, but each joke made that locked door rattle a little more. Thursday night, Daniel found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He Googled piano practice studios in his area. Just out of curiosity, he told himself. Just to see what was out there. There were 3 within reasonable driving distance. One was a music school that rented practice rooms by the hour. $25 for 60 minutes with an upright. $35 for a baby grand. Daniel closed the laptop quickly, like he'd been looking at something he shouldn't. Friday at work, Rita brought up the talent show again during their coffee break. "So, real talk. What are you actually going to do? Because people are starting to ask me, and I don't want you to feel like you have to do something embarrassing." "I don't know yet," Daniel said honestly. "You could always fake an emergency that night, say you got food poisoning or something." Maybe. But even as he said it, Daniel knew he wasn't going to do that. Something had shifted in him over the past week. That locked door wasn't just rattling anymore. It was starting to crack open and light was spilling through. That weekend, Daniel drove to his storage unit for the first time in almost a year. He'd rented the small space when he'd moved into his current apartment, using it for boxes he couldn't fit in his tiny closet, mostly old college stuff, books he couldn't throw away, that sort of thing. But there was something else there too, something he'd carefully packed away and tried to forget about. The storage facility was one of those depressing places, all concrete and fluorescent lights. Daniel's unit was on the 2nd floor, down a long hallway that smelled like dust and old cardboard. He unlocked the door and pulled it up, reaching for the light string. There, in the back corner, under his old winter coats and a broken lamp he'd been meaning to fix. A leather portfolio cracked with age but still intact. Daniel's hands shook slightly as he pulled it out. He sat down right there on the concrete floor of the storage unit and opened it. Sheet music. Dozens and dozens of pieces, some printed, some photocopied, some written out by hand. His grandmother's handwriting, careful and precise, noting fingerings and dynamics in the margins. Little messages in Chinese characters that he could still read, even after all these years. Beautiful here. Play softer. Remember to breathe. This part tells a story. What story do you hear? Daniel's vision blurred. He blinked hard, surprised by the tears. He'd thought he was done crying about this years ago. One piece had fallen loose from the others. He picked it up carefully. Chopin. Ballade number 1. The last piece he'd ever learned. The last piece he'd ever played for her. He remembered the day clearly, even though he tried not to. First week at Juilliard, first semester. He'd been so excited, so ready to prove himself among all these other talented kids. Then the phone call from his mom. His grandmother had collapsed. Heart attack. By the time he'd made it to the hospital, she was already gone, just like that. The person who'd believed in him most, who'd built his entire musical foundation, who'd sacrificed so much to help him succeed. Gone. And with her, apparently, had gone his ability to care about any of it. The piano, the music, the dream. What was the point without her there to share it with? He'd dropped out after that semester, finished a regular business degree at a state school, got a normal job, built a normal life, never touched a piano again. Daniel sat on the storage unit floor for longer than he meant to, the Chopin sheet music still in his hands. The concrete was cold beneath him, and the fluorescent light overhead buzzed in that annoying way cheap lights do, but he barely noticed any of it. His phone buzzed. A text from Rita. Hey, just FYI, they're finalizing the talent show lineup tomorrow. Let me know if you want me to take your name off. No judgment. He should text back. Say yes, take his name off. End this whole thing before it got any more complicated. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. Instead, he typed, "Keep me on the list." Why did he do that? Daniel asked himself the question as he carefully packed the sheet music back into the portfolio, then unpacked it again, then finally just carried the whole thing to his car. He didn't have an answer that made sense. The drive home was quiet. Daniel lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment across town, the kind of place that was clean and functional, but didn't have much personality. He'd never bothered decorating much. What was the point when it was just him? He set the portfolio on his kitchen table and made dinner, trying not to look at it. But it was like the thing had a magnetic pull. Between stirring pasta and checking his phone, his eyes kept drifting back to that worn leather cover. After eating, Daniel opened his laptop. The website for that music school was still in his browser history. Before he could talk himself out of it, he clicked on the Book a Practice Room button. The calendar showed available times. Saturday afternoon had a 2-hour slot open. Room 3, upright piano, $50 total. His finger hovered over the mouse. This was crazy. He hadn't played in 10 years. 10 years. That was like being an athlete who'd stopped training for a decade and suddenly deciding to run a marathon. His muscle memory would be gone. His technique would be rusty. He'd probably forgotten how to read music properly. He clicked Book Now anyway. The confirmation email arrived 30 seconds later. Thank you for booking Practice Room 3 at Harmony Music School. Your session is scheduled for Saturday, February 15th, 2:00 p.m., 4:00 p.m. Daniel closed the laptop and sat back in his chair. His heart was pounding like he'd just done something dangerous. In a way, maybe he had. He'd opened a door he'd worked very hard to keep closed. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about his grandmother, about all those afternoons in her apartment. She'd lived in a small place in the old part of the city, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else. Her building had smelled like cooking spices and old wood, and there was always music coming from somewhere. She'd emigrated from Poland in her 30s, already an accomplished pianist but unable to make a career of it in a new country where she didn't speak the language well. So she'd taught instead, giving lessons to neighborhood kids for $20 an hour, which even back then wasn't much, but she'd never seemed bitter about it. Music is music, she'd told Daniel once. It doesn't matter if you play in a concert hall or in a living room. What matters is that you play with your whole heart. Daniel had believed that once. Believed that music was this pure, beautiful thing that transcended everything else, that it could save you, lift you up, make sense of a world that often didn't make sense. Then she died, and he'd learned that music couldn't save anyone from anything. It was just organized sound, notes on a page, fingers on keys, nothing magical about it at all. Except that wasn't entirely true, was it? Because even now, years later, when he thought about playing, something in his chest loosened. Some tight knot he'd been carrying around started to unravel, just slightly. Saturday came faster than Daniel expected. He woke up with that nervous feeling in his stomach, like before a big presentation at work. He almost canceled 3 times during breakfast, then twice more while getting dressed, and once again sitting in his car in the music school parking lot, but he went in anyway. The school was in an old house that had been converted into studios. The front desk was staffed by a college-age kid with headphones around his neck and the tired look of someone working weekend hours. "Here for a practice room?" the kid asked without much interest. "Yeah, room 3, 2 o'clock. "Cool. Down that hallway, last door on the right. Let me know if you need anything." Daniel walked down the hallway slowly. He could hear music coming from behind the other doors. Someone practicing scales. Someone else working through what sounded like a pop song. A kid taking a violin lesson, the teacher's patient voice offering corrections. Room 3 was small and plain. White walls, a single window with blinds, and an upright piano that had seen better days. The bench was worn smooth from years of students sliding across it. Daniel closed the door behind him and just stood there for a minute, staring at the piano like it might bite him. This was stupid. He should leave. Get his money back, if possible, and forget this whole thing. Instead, he sat down on the bench. The height was wrong. He adjusted it, turning the knob underneath until it felt right. Muscle memory apparently remembered things like proper bench height. His hands hovered over the keys. They were shaking slightly. Daniel took a deep breath and placed his fingers on middle C. He pressed down gently. The note rang out clear and simple. Just one note, but it hit him like a wave. How long had it been since he'd heard that sound, felt that vibration through his fingertips? He played a scale. C major, ascending and descending. His fingers stumbled a little and his wrist position was probably all wrong, but the notes came out in order. Years of training hadn't completely disappeared. Encouraged, he tried another scale. Then another. Then some basic arpeggios. The kind his grandmother had made him practice every single day before he was allowed to play real music. It was rusty. So rusty. His fingers didn't move as smoothly as they once had and his timing was off. But it was there. The foundation was still there, buried under a decade of neglect but not destroyed. After about 20 minutes of scales and technical exercises, Daniel opened the portfolio he'd brought with him. The Chopin was in there, but he wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Instead, he found something simpler. A Mozart piece he'd learned when he was 12. One of the easier sonatas. Nothing too demanding. He set it on the music stand and began to play. The first few measures were painful. He hit wrong notes, lost his place twice, and had to stop and restart. His reading was slower than it used to be, his brain taking longer to translate the symbols on the page into movement. But then, something clicked. His hands remembered a passage and suddenly he was playing it correctly, smoothly. Just for a few seconds, but it happened. The music flowed the way it used to. Daniel stopped, breathing hard. His hands were shaking again, but for a different reason now. He tried again. This time he made it further before making a mistake. Then further still on the third attempt. By the time his 2 hours were up, he'd worked through most of the Mozart piece. It wasn't performance ready, not even close. But it was recognizable. It was music. The kid at the front desk barely looked up when Daniel left. "How'd it go?" "Good," Daniel said. "Can I book another session?" "Sure, man. Same room, same time next week?" Yeah. And, could I get 2 hours on Wednesday too? Let me check. The kid clicked through something on his computer. Yeah, we've got Wednesday evening open, 6 to 8. Perfect. Daniel paid for both sessions and walked back to his car feeling lighter than he had in years. His fingers ached in that good way they used to after a long practice session. His brain felt tired but alive, like he'd woken up parts of it that had been sleeping. The drive home was different from the drive there. He found himself thinking about what pieces he could work on next. The Mozart was definitely doable with practice. Maybe he could try that Beethoven piece he'd loved when he was 15. Nothing too complicated, just something to see what he still remembered. At home, Daniel did something he hadn't done since college. He cleared off his kitchen table, set up the sheet music, and started studying it without a piano, reading through the notes, hearing them in his head, visualizing his fingers playing them. His phone buzzed. Rita again. So I saw the final talent show list. You're still on it. Are you seriously going to do something, or should I prepare for the most epic prank in company history? Daniel stared at the text for a long moment. 4 weeks until the show. Could he actually get good enough in 4 weeks to play something? Not at the level he used to, obviously, but good enough not to embarrass himself. He looked at the sheet music spread across his table, at his hands, which were already starting to remember their old purpose, at the leather portfolio sitting on the chair, full of pieces his grandmother had carefully saved for him. I'm going to play, he typed back. For real. Rita's response came immediately. OMG, really? What are you going to play? Good question. Daniel looked at the Mozart. Too light, maybe. Too simple for what he wanted to say. Because that's what he'd realized sitting in that practice room. He did have something to say. Something he'd been holding in for 10 years. He pulled out the Chopin. It was ambitious. Ridiculously ambitious for someone who'd barely touched a piano in a decade. The piece was about 15 minutes long, technically demanding, emotionally complex. The kind of thing that required months of focused practice even for experienced pianists. But it was the last thing he'd played for his grandmother. The piece she'd helped him perfect right before he left for Juilliard. And if he was going to do this, if he was really going to stand in front of his coworkers and play, then it had to be this piece. It had to mean something. Not sure yet, he texted Rita. I'll figure it out. Over the next week, Daniel fell into a routine. He'd go to work, sit through meetings, analyze data, make small talk in the break room. But in his head, he was always thinking about piano. About fingerings and tempo changes and how to approach that impossible passage in the third section of the Chopin. Wednesday evening came, and he was back in practice room 3. This time he brought the Chopin with him. The first attempt was a disaster. He couldn't even make it through the opening page without stopping multiple times. The piece was way harder than he remembered. Either that or he was way worse than he'd hoped. Probably both, but Daniel kept at it. He broke the piece down into small sections, working on just a few measures at a time. His grandmother had taught him this technique. You can't eat the whole cake at once, she'd say. One bite at a time. By the end of the 2 hours, he could play the first page somewhat smoothly. 1 page out of 11. At this rate, he'd need about 6 months to learn the whole piece. He only had 3.5 weeks. Saturday came, and he was back again. 2 more hours of grinding through the Chopin, his fingers cramping, his brain exhausted, but also exhilarated, because he was making progress. Slow progress, but progress nonetheless. After that session, Daniel did something impulsive. He Googled digital pianos for sale. The digital piano Daniel ordered arrived on Tuesday. It wasn't anything fancy, just a basic model with weighted keys and decent sound. $700 he probably shouldn't have spent. But the moment he'd clicked purchase, he'd known it was the right decision. He set it up in his bedroom, the only place it would fit in his small apartment. The headphone jack meant he could practice at any hour without bothering his neighbors. And practice he did. Every evening after work, Daniel would heat up something quick for dinner, then sit down at the piano for 2 hours. Sometimes 3. He'd work through the Chopin section by section, measure by measure. The muscle memory was coming back faster now, his fingers remembering patterns they'd played thousands of times as a teenager. But it wasn't just the technical stuff coming back. Something else was returning too. That feeling he used to get when the music took over, when his conscious mind stepped aside and his hands just knew what to do. When he wasn't thinking about playing anymore, he was just playing. It didn't happen often. Most of the time he was still struggling, still forcing his way through difficult passages, still making mistakes. But every once in a while, for just a few seconds, the magic would come back. Those moments made all the frustration worth it. At work, people kept asking about the talent show. The event was getting closer, and apparently Daniel's joke performance had become a running gag around the office. Someone had started a betting pool about what he'd actually do. Current frontrunner. He'd come out wearing a ridiculous costume and play one note before bowing and leaving the stage. Daniel didn't correct them. Let them think what they wanted. He wasn't ready to tell anyone what he was actually planning. Partly because he still wasn't sure he could pull it off, and partly because, well, this felt private, sacred almost, like something that shouldn't be shared until it was ready. Rita, though, was getting suspicious. "You've been weird lately," she said one afternoon. They were in the break room and she was studying him over her coffee cup. Like distracted. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Daniel said. "Just busy with some stuff." "What kind of stuff?" "Just personal stuff." Rita raised an eyebrow. "That's not an answer. Come on, what's going on?" "You can tell me," Daniel hesitated. Rita had been nice to him since day one. She'd never pushed too hard. Never made him feel bad about being quiet. If he was going to tell anyone, she'd be the person. "I've been practicing," he said quietly. "Practicing what?" "Piano, for the talent show." Rita's eyes widened. "Wait, seriously? You weren't joking?" "I was joking at first. But then I decided to actually do it." "But you said you play piano as a joke, like you don't really play, right?" Daniel took a sip of his coffee. "I used to play. A long time ago. I was pretty serious about it." "How serious?" "I went to Juilliard for a semester." Rita nearly choked on her coffee. "I'm sorry, what?" "Juilliard. As in the most prestigious music school in the country?" "Yeah, and you just never mentioned this. In 3 years of working together?" Daniel shrugged. "It's not really something I talk about. I quit after one semester. Haven't played since. Until now." "Until now." Rita set down her coffee cup and looked at him seriously. "Daniel, that's amazing. Why did you stop?" The question hit harder than Daniel expected. He'd been so focused on the mechanics of playing again, on relearning the Chopin, that he hadn't really dealt with the why. Why he stopped. Why he was starting again. What any of this meant. "My grandmother died," he said simply. "She was the one who taught me, who pushed me to audition for music schools. When she was gone, I just couldn't do it anymore." "I'm so sorry," Rita said softly. "That must have been really hard." "It was a long time ago. Doesn't mean it wasn't hard." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Rita smiled. "So what are you going to play? Something good, Chopin? Ballad number 1. Rita pulled out her phone and typed into YouTube. A recording started playing through her speaker. The music filled the break room, that gorgeous opening melody that Daniel had been hearing in his sleep for the past 2 weeks. "This is what you're playing?" Rita asked, her eyes wide. "This is really hard, isn't it?" "Yeah. Can you actually play this?" "I don't know yet," Daniel admitted. "I'm trying." Rita listened to more of the recording, her expression changing from surprise to something like awe. "Daniel, if you can play this, you're going to blow everyone's mind. Completely destroy them. That's if I can actually pull it off. How's the practice going?" "It's coming along. Slowly. I can play about half of it decently now. The rest is still pretty rough. You've only been practicing for 2 weeks. 2.5. Still, that's insane." Rita paused. "Does anyone else know about this?" "Just you. Can I tell people?" "This is going to be so good." "Please don't," Daniel said quickly. "If I mess up, I'd rather have it be a surprise. If it's just Daniel making a joke, that's one thing. But if everyone knows I'm supposed to be good and then I fail, that's worse." Rita nodded, understanding. "Okay, your secret is safe with me. But Daniel, I don't think you're going to fail. I think you're going to be incredible." That evening, Daniel practiced longer than usual. 4 hours straight, barely taking breaks. His fingers were getting stronger, more confident. The sections that had seemed impossible 2 weeks ago were starting to feel manageable. Not easy, but manageable. The piece was structured in 4 main sections, each with its own character. The opening was lyrical and sweet. The second section was stormy and dramatic. The third was tender and nostalgic. And the finale was triumphant, powerful, building to this massive climax before ending quietly. Daniel had always loved how the piece told a story. His grandmother had made him think about what story it was telling. Every piece of music is saying something, she'd insisted. You have to understand what it's saying before you can play it correctly. He'd thought the ballade was about love back when he was 16. Some kind of romantic story about meeting someone, losing them, finding them again. Typical teenage interpretation. Now playing it again at 28, Daniel heard something different. It was about grief, he realized. About loss and memory and learning to live with absence. The opening section was remembering someone. The second section was the rage and confusion of losing them. The third was accepting they're gone. And the finale was finding a way to move forward, carrying them with you. That's what his grandmother had been trying to teach him all along, he thought. Music wasn't just technical skill. It was emotional truth, and you couldn't play emotional truth until you'd lived it. 2 weeks before the talent show, Daniel hit a wall. He'd learned about 3/4 of the piece, but there was this one section in the finale that just wouldn't come together. His fingers kept tangling up, hitting wrong notes, losing the rhythm. He practiced it over and over until his hands hurt, but he couldn't get it right. Frustrated, he stopped playing and just sat at the piano, breathing hard. This was stupid. He was stupid for thinking he could pull this off. 10 years away from piano, and he thought he could just pick up where he left off? Play one of the hardest pieces in the repertoire? Who was he kidding? His phone buzzed. His mom, calling to check in like she did every week. "Hey, sweetie," she said when he answered. "How are you?" "I'm okay. You sound tired. Just working on something. Anything interesting?" Daniel hesitated. He hadn't told his parents about the piano. They'd been supportive when he was younger, driving him to lessons and competitions, but they'd also been relieved when he switched to a practical major in college. A business degree meant job security. Music was wonderful, but it was risky. "I've been playing piano again," he said. The line went quiet for a moment. "Oh," his mom said finally. "That's wow. What brought this on?" "I don't really know. It just kind of happened. How does it feel?" "Hard, frustrating, but also good, really good." His mom was quiet again. Then, "Your grandmother would be so happy." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "I know. She always said you had a gift. Even after you stopped, she'd talk about how you used to play. She never blamed you for quitting, you know." She understood. Did she? Of course. She lost people too. She knew what grief could do. His mom paused. "But I think she also hoped you'd find your way back to it someday. Music was such a big part of who you were." After they hung up, Daniel sat at the piano for a long time, not playing, just thinking. His grandmother had understood. Of course she had. She'd lived through a war, left her home country, built a new life from nothing. She knew about loss and moving forward. Maybe that's what the Chopin was really about. Not just grief, but resurrection. Coming back from loss. Finding yourself again after you thought you were gone forever. Daniel pulled up the section that had been giving him trouble. Instead of trying to force it, he played it slowly. Really slowly, thinking about each note, feeling the emotion behind it. This was the climax of the piece, the moment where everything came together. It had to be powerful, yes, but also controlled, measured, earned. He played it again, then again. Each time a little better, a little more right. By midnight, he had it. Not perfect, but good enough. The whole piece was now in his hands, ready to be assembled into something complete. The next week flew by in a blur of work and practice. Daniel went through his days on autopilot, his mind always on the piano. People at the office noticed he seemed distracted, but they assumed he was nervous about the talent show. They weren't wrong exactly. Rita kept checking in, asking how practice was going. Daniel gave her vague positive responses. The truth was, he was terrified. Not of playing badly, though that was definitely a concern, but of playing well. Of opening himself up to all the feelings he'd packed away. Of honoring his grandmother's memory in front of a room full of strangers who'd only ever known him as the quiet analyst from the 4th floor. 3 days before the show, Daniel stayed late at the office. Everyone else had gone home and the building was quiet. He found himself walking past the conference room where the talent show would be held if they weren't renting an outside venue. On impulse, he called Rita. "Hey," she answered. "What's up?" "The talent show is at that event space downtown, right?" "The one on 5th Street?" "Yeah, the Riverside Hall. Why? Do you know if they have a good piano?" I think so. They do a lot of events there." "I can find out. Would you? I just want to make sure it's..." Decent. Daniel, it's going to be fine. Professional venues have professional equipment. I know. He didn't know how to finish that sentence. Rita seemed to understand anyway. You're going to be great. I promise. Friday came. The talent show was that evening at 7. Daniel took a half day at work, went home, and tried to practice one more time. But his hands were shaking too much. He kept hitting wrong notes, losing his place. Finally, he gave up and just lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. What had he been thinking? This was such a bad idea. Daniel arrived at the Riverside Hall at 6 o'clock, an hour before the show started. He told himself he wanted to check out the venue, maybe get comfortable with the space. Really, he was just too nervous to stay home any longer. The hall was nicer than he expected. It was an old converted theater, all wood paneling and brass fixtures with a proper stage and theater seating. Staff were setting up chairs, testing the sound system, arranging the stage, and there, stage left, exactly where it should be, was a black grand piano. A grand. Not an upright, not some beat-up practice instrument. An actual concert grand. Daniel's stomach flipped. He'd been practicing on his digital keyboard at home in that old upright at the music school. Playing on a grand would be completely different. Better, probably, but different. And different meant unpredictable. A woman with a clipboard spotted him lingering near the stage. "Can I help you?" "I'm one of the performers," Daniel said. "I'm playing the piano later." "Oh, perfect. Do you want to do a quick sound check?" Can I? "Sure, that's what you're here early for, right?" "Go ahead, try it out. Just keep it under 5 minutes, we've got other setup to finish." Daniel walked up the steps to the stage, his heart hammering. The piano was beautiful up close. A Steinway, well-maintained, the kind of instrument he'd dreamed of playing when he was younger. The kind his grandmother had promised he'd play one day when he was famous. He sat down on the bench and adjusted the height. The stage lights weren't on yet, which was good. Just the house lights, comfortable and dim. He could pretend he was alone. Daniel placed his hands on the keys. They were cool and smooth under his fingers. He pressed down gently, playing a single note. The sound that came out was rich and full, filling the entire hall with just that one tone. This instrument was special. He could feel it immediately. He played a scale. Then an arpeggio. The action was perfect, responsive. The keys did exactly what he wanted, when he wanted. It was like switching from driving an old truck to a sports car. "Sounds good," the woman called from somewhere in the seats. "Take your time, just wrap up in a few minutes." Daniel nodded, then closed his eyes. He let his hands find the opening of the Chopin. The melody flowed out, that sweet, nostalgic theme that started the piece. On this piano, it sounded the way it was supposed to sound. Rich and warm and alive. His fingers moved through the opening section. And for the first time in weeks of practice, he wasn't thinking about technique or mistakes. He was just playing. He transitioned into the second section, the stormy, dramatic part. His hands flew across the keys and the piano responded beautifully. Every note clear, even in the rapid passages. This was what real pianos could do. This was why people spent their whole lives chasing the perfect instrument. Daniel played for longer than 5 minutes, too caught up to stop. He made it almost to the end of the piece before he finally pulled himself back to reality and lifted his hands from the keys. The hall was silent. Then he heard clapping. Not just the clipboard woman, but several of the staff members who'd stopped working to listen. "That was beautiful," the woman said, walking toward the stage. "Seriously beautiful. What's your name again?" "Daniel." "Well, Daniel, you just set the bar really high for tonight." He climbed down from the stage, his hands still tingling. That had felt good. Really good. Maybe he could actually do this. People started arriving at 6:30. Daniel stood off to the side, watching his co-workers file in with their families and friends. The space was filling up fast. He'd known the talent show was popular, but he hadn't expected this many people. Rita found him near the back. "There you are. I've been looking for you." She was wearing a nice dress, her hair done up. "You look terrified." "I am terrified. Don't be. You're going to kill it." She looked around at the growing crowd. "This is a pretty good turnout. I think we might actually beat last year's fundraising record." "How many people are here?" "I don't know, maybe 150? Could be more. 150 people. Daniel had performed for bigger crowds when he was competing as a teenager, but that was different. Those audiences expected excellence. They were there specifically for piano performances. This crowd was just here for entertainment, for fun. They were expecting amateur hour, not whatever he was about to give them. The show started promptly at 7. The company's CEO gave a welcome speech, talking about the charity they were supporting and thanking everyone for coming. Then the performances began. First up was someone from accounting who sang a pop song. She was pretty good, confident with a decent voice. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Then came a comedy routine that got genuine laughs. A group dance from the marketing team that was energetic if not exactly polished, a magic trick that mostly worked. Everyone was having fun. The atmosphere was light and supportive. These people weren't here to judge anyone. They were here to support their co-workers and raise money for a good cause. That should have made Daniel feel better. Instead, it made him more nervous, because he wasn't doing something light and fun. He was about to play a 15-minute classical piece that demanded absolute focus and emotional vulnerability. Would that even fit the vibe of the evening? Too late to back out now. His name was on the program. Rita kept glancing at him, giving encouraging smiles. And honestly, part of him didn't want to back out. That sound check had reminded him why he'd loved this in the first place. The feeling of connecting with an instrument, of creating something beautiful out of nothing but pressure and timing and emotion. The performances continued. Daniel barely registered them. He was running through the Chopin in his head, hearing every note, feeling every dynamic change. His hands were moving slightly, fingers twitching through the passages. Then he heard his name. And next up we have Daniel from our analytics team. Daniel, come on up. The crowd applauded politely. Daniel stood, his legs feeling weird and disconnected. He walked down the aisle toward the stage, aware of people watching him. Some were smiling, probably expecting whatever joke they thought he was going to pull. A few looked curious. Most just looked supportive and ready to clap for whatever he did. He climbed the steps to the stage. The lights were brighter up here than they'd been during sound check. Hot and white, making it hard to see individual faces in the crowd. That was good, actually. Better not to see everyone staring at him. Daniel sat at the piano and adjusted the bench. His hands were shaking again, so he placed them flat on his thighs for a moment, taking a slow breath. The hall had gotten quiet, waiting. He looked at the piano keys. Black and white, simple and familiar. His grandmother's voice in his head. The piano is your friend. Trust your hands. They know what to do, did they though? After 10 years of silence, could he really trust them to carry him through this? Only one way to find out. Daniel lifted his hands and placed them on the keys. One more breath. Then he began. The opening notes of the Chopin ballade rang out into the hall, that lyrical melody his grandmother had loved so much. Sweet and nostalgic and full of longing. His hands moved through the passage, and despite his nerves, the notes came out clean. Right. He could feel the room's energy change. The polite waiting silence shifted into something more focused. People had expected a joke, maybe a few bars of something simple. Not this. Daniel moved into the second phrase, letting the melody build. The piano sang under his fingers, that gorgeous Steinway tone filling every corner of the hall. He wasn't thinking about technique anymore. He was thinking about his grandmother, about her small apartment, about the way she'd smile when he got something right. The opening section flowed by and he transitioned into the stormy second part. This was where things got technically demanding. Fast runs, big chords, dramatic dynamic changes. His hands flew across the keyboard and years of muscle memory kicked in. The notes tumbled out, powerful and precise. From somewhere in his peripheral vision, Daniel noticed people leaning forward in their seats. Phone cameras coming out. That should have distracted him, but it didn't. He was too far into the piece now, too deep in the music to worry about the audience. The second section built to its climax, then pulled back into the tender third section. This was the heart of the piece, the moment of reflection and sorrow. Daniel played it softly, delicately, thinking about loss, about his grandmother's funeral, about all the years he'd wasted running from his grief instead of facing it. His eyes stung, but he kept playing. This was the part where the piece told its truth, where it said, yes, loss hurts. Yes, absence is unbearable, but beauty remains. Memory remains. Love remains. The notes seemed to hang in the air, fragile and precious. Daniel could hear people in the audience taking sharp breaths. Someone was crying. He could hear it. Then the finale began. The triumphant return of the opening theme, but transformed now. more mature, more accepting, building and building toward that massive climax, the section he'd struggled with so much in practice. His hands were moving on their own now, playing passages he'd drilled thousands of times. The difficult section was coming up, the one that had given him so much trouble. Daniel braced himself, focused completely on the keyboard, and then he was through it. Clean. Perfect even. His hands had known what to do after all. The final climax arrived, huge chords filling the hall with sound. Then the piece wound down, gentle and resolved. Back to that opening melody one last time, but quieter now. Accepting. At peace. Daniel played the final notes, soft and distant, then let his hands rest on the keys for a moment. The sound faded into silence. Nothing happened. For several long seconds, there was no sound at all. Daniel sat frozen, his hands still on the piano, wondering if he'd somehow messed up catastrophically without realizing it. If everyone was too shocked by how bad he'd been to even react. Then someone started clapping. One person, then two, then suddenly the entire hall erupted. People weren't just clapping. They were standing, shouting, cheering. The noise was overwhelming after the quiet intensity of the piece. Daniel lifted his hands from the piano and turned slightly on the bench, seeing the crowd for the first time. Everyone was on their feet. Some people had tears on their faces. Rita was in the front row, crying openly and clapping so hard it had to hurt. He stood up, not sure what to do. Bow, wave? Just leave? He settled for a small nod, then walked off the stage on shaky legs. The applause followed him, not dying down. If anything, it got louder. Backstage, Daniel leaned against the wall, his heart racing. His hands were trembling, and he felt like he might cry or laugh or both. He didn't even know what that had been. Terrifying and exhilarating and cathartic all at once. The stage manager found him. That was incredible. I've worked events here for 15 years, and I've never heard anything like that. Thank you, Daniel managed to say. You need to get back out there. They're not going to stop clapping until you do. What? Go take another bow. Trust me. Daniel walked back onto the stage. The applause, which had started to fade, roared back to life. He gave a proper bow this time, overwhelmed by the response. These were his co-workers. People who'd only ever known him as the quiet guy who kept to himself. And they were giving him a standing ovation. After the show ended, Daniel couldn't escape. People surrounded him, wanting to talk, to shake his hand, to ask questions. Where did he learn to play like that? How long had he been practicing? Why had he been hiding this talent? He answered as best he could, still feeling dazed from the performance. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off now, leaving him exhausted and overwhelmed. Rita finally rescued him, pulling him away from a group of particularly enthusiastic co-workers. You need some air, she said. Come on. They stepped outside into the cool evening. The noise from the hall faded to a distant murmur. Daniel leaned against the building's brick wall and closed his eyes. That was insane, Rita said. Daniel, that was legitimately one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. And I'm not just saying that. I had no idea you could play like that. Neither did I, Daniel admitted. I mean, I used to be able to, but I wasn't sure if I still could. Well, you definitely still can. She pulled out her phone. You're kind of going viral, by the way. What? Rita showed him her screen. Someone had uploaded a video of his performance to social media, and it already had thousands of views. The comments were full of praise, people asking who he was, where they could hear more. Oh no, Daniel said. Oh no? This is amazing. I don't want to be viral. I just wanted to play one piece for one night. But it was too late for that. Over the weekend, the video spread further. It was picked up by a local news site with the headline, Office Worker Stuns Co-Workers with Secret Piano Talent. Then a classical music blog shared it. Then somehow it ended up on one of those feel-good news segments. Daniel's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Friend requests from people he didn't know. Messages from former music school classmates he hadn't spoken to in years. His parents called, having seen the video online, his mother crying happy tears. I knew you still had it in you, she said. Your grandmother would be so proud. That made Daniel tear up too. Because playing the Chopin hadn't just been about performing or proving something to his co-workers. It had been about reconnecting with a part of himself he'd thought was dead, about honoring his grandmother's memory, about accepting that grief and love could exist in the same space. Monday at work was surreal. People he'd never spoken to before came up to talk to him. The CEO stopped by his desk to personally thank him for contributing to the most successful fundraiser the company had ever had. They'd beaten last year's total by almost 40%. Rita was insufferably smug. "I told you that you'd be incredible." "You couldn't have known." "Yes, I could. You had that look about you, like someone who was carrying something important." Daniel wasn't sure what that meant, but he let it go. The attention was uncomfortable at first. He'd spent so long being invisible that being seen felt strange. But as the week went on, it got easier. People weren't treating him like a circus act. They were just genuinely interested in his story, his music, his life beyond work. For the first time since he'd started at the company, Daniel felt like part of the community instead of just a person who showed up to do his job. But the biggest change wasn't at work. It was inside him. That Tuesday evening, Daniel sat at his digital piano in his bedroom. He'd planned to practice more Chopin, maybe learn another piece from the same composer. Instead, he found himself playing something else entirely. An improvisation,